A shocking traffic stop turns hostile as a racist officer confronts a calm black driver on a deserted road. Power dynamics are exposed, and the situation escalates beyond words. But just when the officer feels untouchable, the driver's silence holds something deeper, and the last moment flips the entire scene. "We don't stop for people like you." The words hissed through the air like a bullet. Officer Darren Cole stood tall, a smirk curling under his sunglasses. His boots scraped the dusty asphalt as he leaned toward the cracked window of the aging blue Honda. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, drenching the empty Texas highway in bruised orange and gray. Wind whispered through mesquite trees. The only movement came from the flicker of red and blue police lights bouncing off the hood of the car. Inside sat a black man in his late 20s, well-groomed, eyes calm, both hands on the steering wheel. He hadn't said a word yet. Behind the two of them, a second patrol car had just pulled up. Officer Brian Keller stepped out slowly. He was younger, cleaner cut, and looked like he hadn't quite learned how to walk with arrogance yet. His gaze darted to his partner, then to the driver. Something didn't sit right. "I said license." "And registration," Darren barked again, louder this time. The man inside the Honda, still calm, moved slowly, deliberately, toward the glove compartment. Darren's hand flew to his gun. "Don't move." "I swear to God, I'll shoot you where you sit." A crow cawed in the distance, slicing through the tension. Brian stepped a little closer but didn't say a word yet. His jaw tightened. His hand hovered near his own holster, but not the way Darren's did. The driver stopped moving. "I'm just getting my papers," he said quietly, voice smooth like worn velvet. "You asked." "I know what I asked." Darren's face contorted, his skin pink with rage. "And I know your type. Out here, no plates, tinted windows, slow driving like you're looking for trouble." "I'm driving the speed limit." The man replied, "Wrong answer." Darren yanked the door open with a crack. "Step out of the car." Brian's brow furrowed. This wasn't protocol. There hadn't been a call. No stolen plates. "No alerts, Darren," he said, trying to keep his voice low. "You sure this is?" I said, "Step out of the damn car." Darren yelled, cutting him off. The driver sighed once, like he'd seen this play out 1,000 times, then opened the door and stepped out. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans, spotless white sneakers. No sudden movements, no raised voice. Just eyes steady, almost too steady. "You got drugs in there?" Darren sneered, walking toward the back of the car. "Guns? Something you shouldn't?" The man didn't flinch. "No. Mind if I check? You don't have probable cause." Darren's nostrils flared. "What did you just say?" I said, "Unless you have a legal reason." With one swift movement, Darren grabbed the man's license from his hand, tearing it away like a trophy. "This expired," he lied. "It's valid. I renewed it 2 weeks ago." Darren tore the license in half. The ripping sound echoed like a shotgun blast. Brian's eyes widened. He took a step forward. "Hey, that's not okay. Stay out of this, rookie." Darren snapped. "Let me handle scum like this." The driver blinked, but still didn't raise his voice. "You're doing a lot for a broken taillight." Darren's laugh was sharp, cruel. "Boy, you think this is about a taillight?" Then the driver finally spoke with power, not volume. "Just clarity. My name is Jordan Pierce. My father is Judge Marcus Pierce. You just ripped a federal judge's son's license in half." Silence. Brian stopped breathing. Darren froze. For the first time, his lips parted, not to yell, but in disbelief. Jordan's expression didn't change. "You want to keep going?" Darren's gun hand trembled slightly. Brian moved forward slowly. "Jordan, do you have proof of identity beyond that?" Jordan nodded and reached into his back pocket, showing a second ID, not a driver's license. A federal judicial ID, laminated, bearing both his photo and a seal. Brian's eyes locked with Jordan's, and then they turned to Darren. No one spoke for a long 5 seconds. Only the sound of cicadas and the far-off hum of tires on distant roads. Then Jordan said one last thing, soft but cutting. "You really picked the wrong black man today." A single breath passed between them, and then Brian reached for his radio. Brian's fingers hovered over the radio. His breath came shallow. The static hummed, alive with consequence. Darren's eyes darted from Brian to Jordan, then back. "You're not serious," he said. "Put that down." The younger officer didn't move. His hand clenched around the mic like it held fire. "I have to report this." "No, you don't." Darren's voice dropped into a hiss. "You say anything, your career's over. Mine too. You really want to take us both down because some judge's kid got mouthy?" Jordan stood silently, his arms crossed, unmoving, a calm wall between chaos and truth. "This isn't about him being a judge's son," Brian said. "You pulled your gun. You threatened him. You tore up his ID, and he did nothing wrong." Darren took a step forward. "You've got a future in this department, Keller. Don't throw it away. You think they'll back you? Over me?" But Brian had already pressed the button. "This is Unit 47. I need a supervisor at our location. Officer-involved conduct review. Potential use of force violation. Copy?" The air felt like it shattered. Silence on the line for one long second. Then the voice of the dispatcher, calm but alert. "Copy that. 47. Location received. Supervisor. En route. ETA 5 minutes." Darren's jaw clenched. "You just ended your own career." Brian turned to Jordan, nodding once. "Sir, please stay right here. You are not under arrest." "I apologize for what just happened." Jordan's gaze didn't soften, but he gave a respectful nod. "Thank you." Darren paced like a trapped animal. "You think they'll promote you for this? You think you're some damn hero?" Brian didn't answer. He stepped back, putting space between himself and Darren. His body now squarely between Jordan and his partner. In the distance, headlights appeared. A sleek black SUV with government plates rolled up slowly, stopping behind their cruisers. The door opened and out stepped a tall woman in uniform, Lieutenant Teresa Marino. Known for her steel nerves and no-nonsense record, she walked like the gravel owed her respect. "What the hell is going on here?" she asked. Brian spoke first. "Traffic stop. No probable cause." Officer Cole escalated, drew weapon, used threatening language, and destroyed the civilian's license. She turned to Darren. "Is that accurate?" He was resisting. "Refused to obey orders." "Was the subject armed?" "No." "Hostile?" "No." "But then why was your gun drawn?" Darren's mouth opened, but no answer came. Marino looked to Jordan. "Sir, can you confirm what happened?" Jordan nodded. "You'll find everything on the dash cam and body cams if they were on." Her head turned sharply. "Cameras on?" Brian nodded. "Mine was. His wasn't." Darren's face drained of color. Marino's voice hardened. "Officer Cole, place your weapon on the hood. Now? You're joking. Now." Darren slammed his gun onto the hood of the cruiser. "This is insanity. I've served 15 years. I've trained half the damn precinct. And today you forgot all of it," she replied coldly. The air was thick with dust and humiliation. Marino walked over to Brian. "You did the right thing, Keller. I hope you understand how few do. I wasn't sure I had a choice." "There's always a choice," she said. "You made the rare one." She turned back to Jordan. "Sir, I apologize on behalf of the department. We'll need you to provide a statement. After that, you're free to go. No citations, no charges, and you'll be contacted by Internal Affairs. Jordan looked past her, directly at Darren. His voice was level. He doesn't scare me. But I wonder how many people didn't get this lucky. Darren's eyes were filled with something new, not anger, not defiance, but fear. Marino nodded solemnly. That's why we're here now. She snapped her fingers at Darren. Hands behind your back. What? You can't. You're being placed under administrative detention pending investigation. If what I've heard is true, you'll be facing formal charges. Brian stepped forward, pulled out his cuffs. Darren didn't resist. Not physically, but his pride buckled like glass under a boot. The metal clinked around his wrists. Jordan looked up at the darkening sky as if releasing a weight he'd carried all his life. The wind swept the heat off the road. Somewhere far off, a dog barked. Brian stood beside him. You okay? Jordan nodded once. I've been better, but I've seen worse. The sun was gone now. Only the blue lights remained, flashing against. 3 silhouettes. The officer, the victim, and the broken man in cuffs. And the road ahead was long. The fluorescent lights of the precinct buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow across the rows of desks and worn carpet. Brian walked in alone, the sound of his boots muffled by a tension that hadn't existed that morning. He didn't even make it 10 steps before the whispers began. He really cuffed Darren? Over some traffic stop? Yeah, I heard the guy was a judge's kid. Still, you don't turn on your own. They weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. Brian kept his eyes forward, heading straight for the locker room. He needed 5 minutes to breathe. Just 5 minutes without being looked at like a ghost. He slammed the locker shut and leaned against it. The adrenaline had faded. Now came the come-down, the uncertainty, the doubt. Had he done the right thing? Hey, the voice behind him was low but familiar. Officer Jenkins, 15 years on the force, known for minding his own business. You okay? Jenkins asked. Brian shrugged. I should be. But no. There was a pause. Then Jenkins leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. They're already talking about you. Some say you're brave. Others say you just ended your career. I didn't do it for applause, Brian said. I did it because I saw wrong. What else was I supposed to do? Jenkins didn't answer right away. The thing is, most of us see wrong all the time. We just learn how to live with it. Brian stared at him. And that's supposed to be okay? Jenkins looked tired. I didn't say that. The locker room door creaked open again. Officer Rodriguez stepped in, didn't say a word. Just glared at Brian like he'd spat on the badge. Guess he's the new moral compass, Rodriguez muttered. Hope you enjoy breathing down your neck for the next 6 months. Brian stepped back. You think I did this for clout? I think you forgot who has your back. Not someone who points a gun at an unarmed civilian. Rodriguez scoffed and walked out, the door swinging behind him like punctuation. Brian sank onto the bench. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Hello? Officer Keller? The voice was female, composed. This is Clara Ann, legal counsel for Jordan Pierce. He asked me to reach out. Brian sat up straighter. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Pierce wanted me to thank you personally. He said you didn't hesitate. That means something, especially in front of the wrong crowd. Brian blinked. I just did what anyone should have. Clara's tone shifted slightly. You'd be surprised how many officers don't. But more importantly, Jordan's father, Judge Marcus Pierce, is also aware. He's watching the department response carefully. Brian swallowed. Understood. One more thing, Clara added. There may be media inquiries. We're not making a public statement yet, but when we do, your name will come up. Brian exhaled slowly. I didn't do it for press. I know. That's why it matters." She hung up. Brian stared at the phone in his hand. The weight of her words settled in his chest. He hadn't considered the judge, the media, the ripple effect of a single honest act. But in the precinct halls, he was already becoming something else, a symbol. Not everyone likes symbols. Outside the locker room, Lieutenant Marino walked in through the main doors, clipboard in hand. Officers looked up. Conversations paused. Eyes followed her. She headed straight for the captain's office without a word. Brian watched through the glass as Marino spoke quietly with Captain Reeves. The old man nodded, didn't smile once. He didn't even flinch. A minute later, the door opened and Marino called out, "Keller." Brian stood and walked toward the office. As he passed desks and stairs, the silence grew louder. He stepped in, closed the door behind him. Reeves looked at him squarely. "You did the right thing." "Thank you, sir. But this isn't over. Darren's going to fight back. Union lawyers, internal politics, maybe even civil action. I understand. You need to be ready for backlash. From the public. From inside this building." "I am." Reeves stood, his voice low. "We don't always get a clean shot at cleaning up rot. You took it. I won't forget that, but you'll need to be twice as sharp now." "Yes, sir." Marino placed a folder on the desk. "Formal statement request. You'll need to write it tonight. EA review starts tomorrow." Brian took the folder and nodded. "I'll be ready." As he stepped out of the office, the weight returned, but not like before. This time it came with clarity. He was on the right side of a line, even if that line was thin. Even if it meant walking alone. The room was cold, intentionally so. Internal affairs liked discomfort. It made people talk. Brian sat stiffly at the long metal table. A camera blinked quietly in the corner. Across from him sat two EA investigators, a black woman in a Navy suit named Officer Deshawn and an older white man named Wallace, whose silence spoke louder than his questions. Deshawn leaned forward. "We've reviewed your initial statement, Officer Keller. Today we'll be going through the dashcam and bodycam footage together. You may stop us at any time if you wish to comment." Brian nodded, understood. She clicked play. The screen came to life. The dashcam video started with Jordan's car pulling over onto the gravel shoulder. The sound of tires crunching filled the room. Then came Darren's voice. "We don't stop for people like you." Wallace shifted slightly in his seat. The room remained still. Brian watched his own younger face, caught in the corner of the frame, glance over, jaw tight. He hadn't spoken then. He remembered the knot in his gut. The moment his silence felt louder than the words Darren spat. The footage continued. Darren demanding papers. Jordan complying calmly. Darren's gun appearing. The rip of the license. The tearing sound crackled through the speakers like thunder. Deshawn. "Pause the video. So far, everything you described matches. Did you ever fear for the civilian safety?" Brian answered without hesitation. "Yes. When Darren drew his gun, Jordan didn't move, didn't flinch. But I knew if he twitched wrong, it was over." She nodded and resumed the video. Now came Brian's voice, clearer than he remembered it, calling dispatch for a supervisor. The moment that shifted everything. A quiet revolution spoken through a radio mic. The video ended with Darren's arrest. Wallace finally spoke. "Do you realize how rare this footage is?" Brian looked at him. "Yes." "Not the abuse." Wallace clarified. "The accountability." That landed differently. Deshawn turned to Wallace. "We've also obtained footage from Officer Cole's previous patrols." Brian blinked. "You have?" Deshawn tapped her folder. "He's been turning off his body cam for months, but dash cams don't lie. We've reviewed 5 separate stops. All minorities, all escalated, none documented officially. Brian leaned back, sick rising in his throat. He's been doing this for years. Wallace's eyes narrowed. With the department silence. No one spoke. Deshawn clicked another. Video. Different day. Different driver. Same Darren. Same rage. Same patterns. Brian watched helplessly as a Latino teenager was yanked from his car for suspected gang signs. The boy never said a word. Another tape. A young black woman screamed at, accused of drug trafficking for having incense in her back seat. Each clip stabbed deeper. Deshawn paused the final video. You may have stopped him just in time. Brian felt a knot rise in his chest. How many complaints? Too few, she said grimly. Most never filed. The ones that did, buried. Signed. Off by former captains. Protected by union lawyers. Brian's mouth went dry. Deshawn slid a file across the table. Which is why your decision, on record, triggered something bigger than one case. You didn't just report an officer. You cracked the glass. Brian stared at the folder. Inside was a transcript of every complaint ever filed against Darren Cole. Dozens of names. Each one a person who'd been silenced. Wallace stood. You'll be called in to testify if this goes to criminal court. Brian nodded. I'll be there. Deshawn looked him dead in the eye. What you did, it's the beginning. But beginnings are dangerous. I'm not afraid. She raised an eyebrow. You should be. He stood to leave as Brian walked down the sterile hallway. He passed officers who wouldn't meet his gaze. Others whispered in corners. A few gave curt nods. No one smiled, but when he stepped out into the sun, Clara Ann was waiting. Mr. Pierce would like to meet you, she said. Brian blinked. In person? Clara nodded. He said something about closing the loop and giving credit where it's due. Brian hesitated. What is this? She smiled faintly. It's not a trap. It's a reckoning. Brian looked back at the building behind him, a fortress of silence and fear, then stepped forward. The courthouse towered like a relic of another time. Marble columns, gray stone, and polished glass that reflected the weight of 1,000 quiet verdicts. Brian had never been here as anything other than security detail. Never as someone called by name. He followed Clara Ann through the wide halls. Her heels clicked with unshaken rhythm. Brian's steps felt heavier. They reached a private conference room, sunlight slanting in from tall windows. Inside stood Judge Marcus Pierce. Tall, regal, a face carved by years of discipline. No robe today, just a navy suit, sleeves rolled up, and a wristwatch that probably cost more than Brian's cruiser. Jordan stood beside him, leaning casually against the wall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Officer Keller, the judge said without looking up. Sit. Brian sat. A pause. Pierce finally looked up. You nearly witnessed my son's execution. How does that feel? Brian blinked. Honestly, I don't think it's fully hit me. Then let me help, Pierce said. If Jordan had moved an inch to the left, we'd be planning his funeral. And the headlines would read, Driver reached suddenly during lawful stop. That's what they'd print. That's what people would believe. And your partner? He'd be back on patrol tomorrow. Brian's stomach twisted. I stopped it. I did everything I could. Pierce studied him. Yes, and that's exactly why I called you here. Jordan finally spoke. You're not the first to see it happen. You're just the first to say something. Brian shook his head. I didn't want this to become political. Pierce cut him off. Everything is political, officer. Keller, especially silence. Brian looked at the judge, searching for condemnation. Instead, he found something else. Sadness. I've seen your report, Pierce said. I've watched the footage. But here's what I want you to understand. This department, this city, this system doesn't punish men like Darren. Not easily. It protects them. It buries their history under bureaucracy and policy. Brian nodded slowly. I've been learning that the hard way. Good, Pierce said. Because this isn't about one racist cop. It's about an institution that raises them, promotes them, and calls them brother while they brutalize citizens in the dark. Brian sat straighter. I want to help change that. Pierce smiled faintly. Do you? Yes, sir. Then brace yourself, because the system bites back. And it always starts with the whistleblower. Clara stepped forward and placed a thick manila folder on the table. We're filing a formal civil rights lawsuit. Federal. We're naming Darren Cole, but also the department. The union, the city if necessary. Brian's eyes widened. That's going to get messy. It's already messy, Jordan replied. We're just refusing to pretend it's clean. Pierce interlaced his fingers. And when we file, the media will come. They'll ask for your name, your story, your face. Brian's heartbeat picked up. Do I have a choice? Pierce's voice softened for the first time. Yes, you do, but know this, staying silent makes you safe. Speaking makes you powerful, not popular, but powerful. The room fell quiet. Brian looked at Jordan, whose eyes didn't blink. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. Brian exhaled. I'll stand with you. However I can. Pierce nodded once, sharply. Then you'll testify? Yes. Clara's lips curled upward. Good. Then the truth might finally crack through. Brian stood to leave. The meeting felt like the opposite of what he'd expected. No anger, no praise. Just clarity. Just wait. As he reached the door, Pierce called out, One last thing, Keller. Brian turned. You're a good man, the judge said, but they will come for you, not with guns, with rumors, with transfers, with silence. Brian held his gaze. I'm ready. Then so are we. Outside the courthouse, the air was warm again. But it felt heavier. Brian looked up at the flag flying above the marble steps. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like it was flying for him. The first thing Brian noticed was silence, not the kind that comes with focus or respect, but the cold, deliberate kind. The kind that turned greetings into glares, that shrank entire hallways into gauntlets of quiet judgment. He stepped into the squad room. No nods, no hey, Keller. Just the sound of keyboards and shifting chairs. His locker was open. He hadn't left it that way, and someone had taped a piece of paper to the inside wall. A single word, snitch. Brian peeled it off slowly, fingers trembling. The ink bled slightly, like whoever wrote it pressed too hard. He looked around. No one made eye contact. He shut the locker quietly, strapped on his vest, and headed to briefing. Captain Reeves wasn't there. Instead, Sergeant Miller, a man who'd once invited Brian to his daughter's wedding, read off the assignments in a clipped monotone. When he reached Brian's name, he didn't even look up. Keller, Solo Patrol, Beat 9. Brian blinked. That's warehouse territory. No backup zone. Didn't ask for commentary, Miller replied, flipping the clipboard. A few officers chuckled under their breath. Brian stood frozen for a moment, then grabbed his radio and headed out. Inside the cruiser, he turned the ignition. The silence followed him, humming through the vents. He pulled out of the lot and began driving, watching the shadows stretch across cracked concrete. Beat 9 was where they sent rookies and punishment assignments. Endless rows of empty buildings. One coffee shop. No lights. Known for dead zones. Where radios glitch and help takes too long. He drove slowly, scanning corners. Every car. Every face. Then his radio buzzed. Unit 221, you reading? Brian grabbed the mic. 221 go. A pause. Then static. Then a voice. You should have kept your mouth shut. Brian's heart skipped. Who is this? Silence. Then a click. Just like that, gone. Brian pulled over, fingers tight on the wheel. That wasn't a prank. That was personal. And whoever sent it was close enough to access the dispatch channel. He grabbed his phone. Dialed Reeves. No answer. He tried Marino. Voicemail. Brian stared out the windshield. Was this how they were going to do it? No confrontation. Just exile, threats. And if something happened to him out here, they'd call it coincidence. His eyes caught movement. A man crossing the alley ahead. Hands in pockets. Hood up. Brian stepped out, hand near his belt. Hey, you all right? The man looked up, young, black, maybe 20, nervous. I ain't got nothing, man. I'm not here for that. You okay? He hesitated, then nodded. Just trying to get home. Brian nodded slowly. Stick to the main street. You don't want to be back here alone. The guy frowned. Funny. Ain't you the cop who cuffed the racist one? Brian's mouth opened slightly. How'd you? It's all over TikTok, man. My cousin shared it this morning. Said you a unicorn? Brian almost laughed. A unicorn? The man grinned. White cop with a conscience. Rare breed. Brian shook his head. Just trying to do my job. Nah, the guy said, walking past. You trying to do the right job. Different thing. As he disappeared into the light, Brian stood alone again. Back in the car. Another radio crackle. 221, report status. Brian grabbed the mic. Clear. No contact. Copy. Normal voice this time. Routine. Like nothing had happened. But the fear had planted its seed. He drove the rest of the shift in silence. When he returned to the station after dark, the parking lot was nearly empty, except for a note on his windshield, folded. No envelope. He opened it under the yellow floodlight. You think you're safe because you're right. But right doesn't matter when you're alone. No signature. Brian didn't crumple it. Didn't throw it away. He folded it carefully. Put it in his breast pocket. Inside the locker room, he found his gear dumped on the floor. His backup firearm was missing. He checked the lock intact. Someone had a copy of his key. That night, he drove home with one hand on his lap and the other on his sidearm. His house was dark, still, but inside him, something shifted. They were trying to scare him. It was working. But fear has a strange way of evolving. From panic. Into purpose. The headline dropped at 6:03 a.m. Racist cop sued after nearly killing black driver. White partner turned him in. Below it, a still image from the body cam footage. Darren pointing his gun. Jordan's hands frozen midair. And Brian, standing behind his partner, mouth open. Radio in hand. It was already trending before Brian poured his coffee. By 6:15 a.m. His phone had over 200 missed notifications. By 6:22, a news van was outside his house. He pulled the curtain aside, hard hammering. A woman with too much hairspray stood beside a cameraman, holding a mic like it was a dagger of truth. Brian's phone rang. Clara, you're viral. No kidding, he muttered. You okay? I don't know what that means anymore, she sighed. We tried to keep your name out of it, but someone in the department leaked the full report. Of course they did. Brian sat down, the TV on. In the background. Another channel. Another headline. Cop breaks blue code to stop police violence, hero or traitor. Split screen. Civil rights lawyer on one side. Retired police chief on the other. He betrayed his own, the chief growled. You don't arrest your partner on the street. That's not how it works. Clara's voice crackled through the phone. They're going to start painting you as disloyal. That's the playbook. They already started. A knock at the door. Not news this time. Two officers in plain clothes, both stone-faced. Brian opened the door cautiously. Internal security, one said. You're being temporarily reassigned to administrative leave, pending full departmental review. Brian blinked. What? They handed him a folder. Turn in your badge and weapon. Effective immediately. He didn't argue. Just handed. Over the weight on his hip, and the heavier one on his chest. Any statement I should prepare? Clara asked later. No, he said. Let the tape speak. But the tape didn't speak for everyone. That evening, as the sun dipped behind rooftops, Brian scrolled through the internet chaos. Whistleblower or backstabber? Officer breaks code of silence, public applauds. Cops protest. Jordan Pierce's father speaks. My son was almost a hashtag. He saw his own name on Twitter, trending, memes, edits, death threats mixed with fan edits of him as Captain America with a badge. He didn't know what was real anymore. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was Jordan. Brian opened the door slowly. You good? Jordan asked. Brian nodded. You're calm for a man in a storm. Jordan shrugged. Storms ain't new to us. You're the one learning to breathe underwater. Brian motioned him in. Jordan handed over a flash drive. You'll want to see this. On the screen, leaked footage. Old patrol car footage. One from 4 months ago. Darren pulling over a car. A Muslim family. Children screaming as he tore apart their luggage on the shoulder. Brian stared, sickened. They kept this hidden? For years, Jordan said. Until your arrest lit a fire. Jordan leaned forward. This isn't about just Darren. It never was. It's about a pattern. And you're the crack in the glass. Brian whispered, Then why does it feel like I'm losing everything? Jordan answered without hesitation. Because you are. Brian looked at him, confused. That's how change works, Jordan said. You don't get to keep the old life when you fight for a better one. You lose your brothers, your safety, your silence. Brian stared at the dark TV screen, his reflection staring back. And what do I get instead? Jordan stood, history. He left without another word. That night, Brian lay awake. His phone buzzed every few minutes, interview requests, podcast invites, threats from burner accounts. He didn't respond to any. But one text came from an old friend, a cop he hadn't heard from since the arrest. You did the right thing. Wish I had your guts. Stay safe. Brian stared at it for a long time. The silence from the department had grown loud, deafening. But beyond that silence, something else was stirring. Noise, demand, witnesses, truth. The storm was real. But storms also wash things clean. He hadn't been seen in weeks. Darren Cole had vanished from the precinct, from the streets, from the public eye, hiding behind union lawyers, media statements, and a brick wall of silence. But silence, like rot, doesn't last forever. At 9:04 a.m., everything changed. Breaking. Internal Affairs leaks full complaint history of Officer Darren Cole, 18 prior use of force allegations. All dismissed. It hit like a THUNDERCLAP. Brian sat on his couch, remote in hand, as the footage looped across every major network. Anchor voices spoke with rising disbelief. Double quotes. Allegations span 8 years. Use of slurs caught on dashcam audio. 3 complainants were minors. By noon, hashtags trended. Expose Cole, #blue wall falling, #Jordan could have died at 1 p.m. Darren's house was surrounded, not by protesters, but by press. The same cameras that once praised his decisive policing now zoomed in on drawn blinds and slammed doors. Brian scrolled through the live feed. Then he got the call. Clara, calm as ever. It's happening. What is? The union just dropped him. Brian froze. What? They pulled their legal support. Leaked a statement blaming one bad actor who does not represent the values of the department. Brian almost laughed. They made him a scapegoat. They made him disposable, Clara corrected. Because you made silence expensive. An hour later, a second explosion. Darren Cole arrested for perjury, evidence tampering, and civil rights violations. Brian sat in stunned silence, watching the footage. No lights, no sirens. Just two plainclothes officers leading Darren out of his own house in cuffs. His face, once proud, cocky, now pale, slack-jawed. No words, just the sound of shutters clicking. The man who barked orders. The man who drew.
First, the man who always got away with it.
Was now being led down his own driveway like a criminal, because he was. And now, the system couldn't protect him. But it didn't end there. The mayor spoke next, brief, nervous. We are deeply disturbed by Officer Cole's history, which did not surface through our internal oversight. This is a wake-up call for reform, accountability, and trust. Translation. We ignored it until it got too loud. Brian turned off the TV. It was too much. Too fast. The doorbell rang. He opened it to find Captain Reeves, civilian clothes. No badge. Can we talk? Brian hesitated, then stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table. The air between them felt heavy, tight. I owe you an apology, Reeves said. Brian blinked. You do? I should have backed you the moment you reported Darren, but I didn't. Brian stared at him. You didn't just fail to back me. You let them isolate me, threaten me. Reeves looked down. I know. I thought I was protecting the department. What I did was protect a man who didn't deserve it. Brian's voice was cold. Because he wore the right color? No, Reeves replied softly. Because he didn't threaten the silence. You did. Brian sat back. That was it. That was the truth. I came here because the city's opening a commission, Reeves continued. Oversight. Civilian review. Board. They want a voice from inside, someone who saw both sides. Brian raised an eyebrow. You think I want back in? I think you want justice. Brian looked at him for a long time, then shook his head. I want change, not more committees. Reeves stood, nodded. Fair. As he walked to the door, he stopped, turned around. For what it's worth, you were right. From the beginning. Brian didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, Brian drove past the precinct. It looked smaller now, quieter, like something had cracked and was still trying to understand itself. He didn't stop. Just kept driving, across the city. Darren Cole sat alone in a cell. No badge. No union. No shield. The silence he'd relied on was gone. And for the first time, so was the system that once held him up. The room was packed. Not with uniforms. Not with rank or stripes or badges. But with people. Students, mothers, community elders, activists, and even former officers now in suits. Foldable chairs lined the community center, every seat filled. Dozens more stood along the walls. At the front sat a single wooden podium, unadorned, humble. A microphone hummed softly. Brian stood backstage, adjusting the stiff collar of his shirt. He wasn't in uniform. He hadn't worn it since the day he was suspended. He didn't miss the fabric. Clara appeared beside him, clipboard in hand, whispering as someone introduced him on stage. You don't have to say what they want. Just say what's true. Brian nodded. And if I mess it up? She smiled. Then at least you're messing it up on the right side of history. Applause rose as his name was called. Former Officer Brian Keller, the man who broke the silence. He stepped into the light. Some clapped. Some just watched. And some, the ones who once would have crossed the street when they saw a cop, leaned forward. Curious. Waiting. Brian gripped the podium, took a breath, and began. I once heard a phrase, "The system isn't broken. It's working exactly how it was designed." A few nods in the crowd. When I arrested my partner for pointing a gun at an unarmed black man, I thought I'd be backed. I thought doing the right thing would be enough. It wasn't. He scanned the crowd. Saw Jordan in the second row, arms crossed but eyes soft. A teacher in the back wiped her eye. A retired black officer near the wall stood still, jaw clenched. I wasn't punished officially, but unofficially, they made me invisible. They made me expendable. Because I didn't protect silence, I disrupted it. He paused, but I'd do it again, and again. A murmur rippled. Because I finally understand, silence is the most violent weapon law enforcement ever wielded. A wave of stillness followed. Then a hand raised in the back. An older man, maybe late 60s, stood. I was pulled over in 1984, hands on the wheel. My son in the back seat. Cop called me boy and searched my trunk without cause. Nothing ever happened to him. You think this changes anything now? Brian stepped from the podium, walked to the front edge of the stage. No, that moment in 1984 still happened, and I can't undo it. But what I did might help make sure your grandson doesn't go through the same thing. The man stared back for a moment, then nodded once. Sat down. Another voice, this time younger, a woman, 20s. What would you say to the other officers who stayed silent? Brian looked directly at her. I'd say, you don't get to call yourself a good cop if your silence protects bad ones. Being nice on patrol isn't enough. If you're not willing to speak up, you're part of the problem. The room broke into scattered applause. Someone shouted from the side, say it louder. Brian raised his voice. You can't be neutral in a system that isn't. Applause grew. He stepped back. We say serve and protect, but who are we serving? And what are we protecting? If the answer isn't everyone, then the whole damn system needs rewriting. The applause turned thunderous. Brian didn't smile. He didn't raise his fists. He just stood there, letting the words settle, because it wasn't about a speech. It was about a shift. A room full of people had seen what courage looked like, not in armor, but in vulnerability, and something cracked open. Not just outside, but inside. After the event, people lined up. Some for handshakes, some for apologies. A few cops off duty gave him quiet nods. But one man, mid-30s, wearing a faded hoodie, didn't say a word. Just handed Brian a folded photo. Brian opened it. It was Jordan, hands raised. That night. That freeze frame. But this time, someone had sketched wings on his back. Angelic. Powerful. On the bottom, it read, he survived because you refused to stay silent. Brian clutched it tight. For once, silence wasn't a weapon. It was sacred. 6 months later, the city felt different. Not fixed. Not transformed, but aware. The billboard above Interstate 84 still bore the words, justice is an action, not a promise. Painted bold against a black background, it showed no logos, no sponsors. Just the message. Underneath, cars passed, lawyers, nurses, students, cops. Some read it. Most didn't, but it didn't matter, because it was there, and it wasn't going anywhere. Brian now worked at a local nonprofit, Bridge 9, a justice-focused organization founded by former public defenders and community organizers. His job wasn't glamorous, mostly administrative. Reports, schedules, coordination. But every once in a while, he'd step into the youth forums. He never introduced himself as a former cop. He didn't need to. They knew, one afternoon, after a heated discussion on school policing, a boy with tight braids and heavy eyes asked him, do you miss it? Brian paused. Miss what? The badge? The power? He thought for a long moment, then said quietly, I miss believing it meant something. The boy nodded like he understood, then asked, "Do you still feel like a cop?" Brian exhaled. "No, I feel like a person who used to believe in the wrong kind of silence." The boy fist bumped him and walked away. That was enough. Jordan had changed too. He had taken the settlement money and opened a mentorship studio downtown. Music, design, film, all under one roof. A sanctuary for black and brown kids who'd been told the world didn't need their voice. He called it CTRL alt because, he explained, we're rewriting the program. Brian visited sometimes, always unannounced. Never stayed long. Just listened. Watched. One evening, they sat on the rooftop of the building, watching the city blink below. Jordan passed him a soda. "You still get hate mail?" Brian smirked. "Not as much. Just weird emails now. One guy offered me money to speak at a white ethics summit. I declined." Jordan laughed hard, head tilted back. "Man, the audacity." They sipped quietly. Then Brian said something he hadn't told anyone. "Sometimes I wonder if it would have mattered if you hadn't recorded." Jordan didn't flinch. "It would have mattered to me." Brian looked at him. "But you almost died." Jordan nodded. "Yeah, I almost did. But I didn't, and now I'm not invisible anymore." Silence again, but this one soft, earned. Brian asked, "Do you forgive him?" Jordan didn't answer for a long time, then said, "I don't think forgiveness is for him. It's for me. And I'm not there yet." Fair. More than fair. Darren Cole's trial was still underway. The department had flipped on him completely. Prosecutors had dug deep, connecting his behavior across years and victims, testimonies, videos, internal complaints never investigated. The courtroom had no heroes, just facts. Jordan had testified, calm, controlled, not vengeful, just clear. Brian sat in the back row, not in uniform, not as a witness, just present. Darren wouldn't look at him. Not once, but Brian didn't need him to, because justice isn't about eye contact. It's about consequence. One morning, Brian walked into a coffee shop. The barista, young, nervous, handed him a drink with a shy smile. "I added a shot for free," she whispered. "My uncle saw your interview. Said you reminded him that not all silence is loyalty." Brian smiled. "Thank you." As he left, a poster on the wall caught his eye. It was hand-drawn. Black marker on white paper. A face, Jordan's, below it. The words, "He didn't raise his hands to surrender. He raised them to survive." Brian stood frozen for a moment, then walked out, back into a world that still needed work. Still needed watching. Still needed people willing to lose comfort for truth. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't broken. He was simply a man who chose once not to look away, and that choice echoed, still echoing.